Okay, now going back to your preparation, do you watch reruns after a day's racing and think, that's why I went wrong, or I missed that there, or that's why that didn't win, or that's how that got up?
I do. I'm not an avid. I won't sit and watch the whole evening's racing that I've just sat through in the afternoon. I don't do that on a daily basis, but I certainly will watch replays of races, and certainly if I've had a bad day, if things have gone badly, then yeah, I'll sit down and think, right, what could I have done nothing different there? And often, of course, the answer will be yes. Sometimes, it's just a case of these things happen. But yeah, so more often than not, if things have gone badly, then I will pay them more attention than if they've gone well.
I think most people will accept that the life of a professional gambler can be extremely stressful. It's not a job you can necessarily switch off of. And I know you've got a young family. How do you juggle family? And previously when we talked, you said you work 7 days a week very regularly. How do you manage to juggle a family life with the stresses and strains and time, being a professional gambler?
Well, I guess there's a payoff. On the one hand, I do 7 days a week, but being in running betting, I do some prep at the beginning of the day, but I don't really have to start work till lunchtime normally, so my mornings are free. So although I'm doing 7 days a week, I've got free time, I've got my evenings free. I also work from home, which gives a lot of freedom. So it's a question of juggling those kind of things, and 90% of the time it works out okay. If children are running into the office in the middle of a particularly tense couple of furlongs when there's a lot on the line, then the tempers can get frayed. But yeah, on the whole, we managed to work it quite well.
Now, you didn't say last time what sort of figures you bet to. I can understand why, but people are sort of interested. So just give us a rough idea. I mean, do you try and aim to win a certain amount per race or per day, or have you got a certain amount you would click to? And is there scope to get bigger and bigger infinitum, or is there a point where you have to accept that this is as big as it's going to get for you?
In terms of the amount, I certainly don't. I have a rough amount of, today's racing looks good, that would be a reasonable figure, but I think it's very dangerous to think, right, I want to make this. You have to treat it as it comes. So some days will look better than others, and certainly, at the Cheltenham Festival, I'll have higher expectations than I would for, an all-weather card in January. But yeah, you can't force things. You can have an idea of what you want to do, and similar things apply to the bigger, better racing. There is more liquidity, so I would have bigger exposures. I would certainly be happy to lay things for 2,000 or 3,000 at big races where the horses, the time delay, the money in the market. Whereas I certainly wouldn't do anything like that for kind of run-of-the-mill weekday cards. So yeah, there's a variable there, and it varies also. I talked at the beginning about how this summer has been tough. It depends on the type of race. A lot of this summer has been kind of chiseling away with really small amounts. If you're watching a 1.5 mile 5-runner handicap at Yarmouth on firm ground, no offence Yarmouth, everybody's watching the same 5 horses, nothing much is happening. It's ATR, so I know I'm a long way behind. You'd be daft to risk, big exposures on that kind of thing. So with the exception of the big meetings, Goodwood, Ascot, York next week, during the summer, it is more of a grind. But if you're working 7 days a week, there are at least 20 races most days, I would think. You don't need a huge, obviously you're not going to win on every race, but if you're making small amounts on a regular basis on each race, then that adds up. So in a long answer to the question, there are different variables. There will be big wins and big losses when I'm happy to take the plunge at big meetings and with big liquidity. Sometimes it's more run-of-the-mill stuff and it's more chiseling away with bits and bobs that hopefully will add up over time. So
would you see every race as a potential profit, no matter how small? So for example, a a 3-runner novice hurdle with a 5 on shot, would you think a cup of tea, or would you think I might be able to nick a 5 off of this somewhere?
I'm pretty bad for being able to resist. Quite often it'll be to really small stakes. But yeah, most races, if I'm honest, if I'm working, I have an interest in most races, yeah. And some will be scaled right back, but I do play most races if I'm on a working day.
Now, you mentioned to me when we were chatting before that you have given people advice. People have sort of sat down with you for a couple of hours that want to get involved. And you've also mentioned that little knowledge is a dangerous thing. So can you give people that they've watched you now for the second time and they're thinking, no, I really think I can have a go at this. Some advice for people that want to take it seriously?
Well, the little knowledge is a dangerous thing is quite appropriate, I think. I certainly remember watching, because a few people have kind of sat in and I'd like to watch this and have a go. And I remember a horse called Captain Scooby, who was a sprint handicapper of recent years, always outpaced. And basically what he needed was a pace collapse. The leaders go off too quickly, he'll be punched and kicked and shoved the whole way, and if they collapse, then he'll come through, and if it's his day and he's weighted accordingly, then he'll pick up the odd race, and that's how he wins his race. And I was watching this with a friend of mine who was trying to do this, and this was a little 5-runner handicap at Hamilton, I think, and they got to about 2 furlongs out, and Captain Scooby was just behind the leaders going nicely enough, and he kind of had this in his head, Captain Scooby always punched and kicked along, always miles behind, there's 2 furlongs to go, it's a certainty. Whereas I was sat there laying it thinking, if Captain Scooby's sat there travelling nicely, they've got absolutely no gallop, they're just going to quicken away from him at the 2-pole. And he really, and so, yeah, it's not as simple as, Richard Hughes is sat there, it's going to win, Kieran Fallon's shoving away, it's not going to, a little knowledge can be a dangerous thing. And I've, watched thousands and thousands of horse races, and that doesn't stop me getting it wrong on an hourly, if not daily basis. But yeah, it is dangerous, I think, I understand this, I know this, there are pitfalls out there, even when you think you know what you're looking at.
So you would advise people it's just a case of experience, really? Yeah,
I mean, I said in the last interview, I was hooked on racing when I was about 11, I think. So from a really early age, I was watching. Again, my older brother got me into it, and that's another point I spoke earlier about all the little things that go to make up a race. We used to watch races on an old VHS video recorder. He'd come in from work and I'd come in from school, which isn't a good thing to admit, but we'd watch the racing together. And if it was a 3-mile hurdle, he'd, was it a circuit? Yeah, fast forward. So we don't need, whereas I think, no, because I'd want to see every little tiny bit, right? How did they jump the first? What's that? And that was from quite an early age, I think, understanding that little tiny bits make up the outcome.
But I suppose you wouldn't object to a whole load of new people having to go from home with all that extra liquidity?
Well, extra liquidity is always good, but again, as I said last time, you can bet in £2, can't you? So yeah, I think it would be wrong to say, this is a piece of cake, jump on in. But if you think it's something that you can do, then give it a go. But I would, again, over the years, people who have not only watched, but other people, both in racing and particularly in poker, when poker had an explosion, I think you've got to be true to yourself. You've got to keep good records, and you've got to be honest. They quite often say, I think I'm going to give this poker a go, because look, I won that tournament, I did well there. I'd had a few that night, so we'll ignore that. Well, no, you can't ignore that. You've got to look at every bit and by all means, learn from the things you've done wrong and eradicate the mistakes. But I think there's forget about that. I wouldn't do that again. You've got to, if you're doing it properly, record absolutely everything that you do, and your figures need to be 100% pure and honest. That would be a key piece of advice, I think.
Okay, Matt Mantle, thank you very much.
No problem.